Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the BCG Matrix, also called the Growth Share Matrix, the Boston Matrix, or the Product Portfolio. It is a chart that categorizes all of the company's products or business units into 4 groups or quadrants. There are the question marks, the stars, the cash cows, and the dogs. Let's take Apple for example. They have iPhones, iPods, Apple Watches, and the App Store, just to name a few. And all of those products will be somewhere along the matrix. What this does is it helps companies visualize how each of their products stand relative to one another, so they can determine which products they should focus more time and money on, and which they should either sell or shut down completely. Here is an example of a BCG matrix I pulled up from Google. It has 2 dimensions. The vertical axis represents the rate of growth of the market. So how attractive is the market? Is it in its decline stage or is it still growing? This is usually represented by the rate of growth of annual sales. The horizontal axis represents the relative market share. So how does your product compare with your largest competitor? For example, let's say your product has 20% of total market share. If your largest competitor also has 20% of total market share, then your relative market share would be 1. A lot of BCG matrices have 1 as the center point. So a product would have to be number 1 among all of its competitors in order to technically be considered a star or cash cow. But I would say that the top 3 brands in any industry can be considered either a star or cash cow. Each circle inside the matrix represents one of your business units or product lines. So in the case of Apple, 1 circle would represent the iPhone, 1 would be the iPod, 1 would be the Apple Watch and App Store, etc. The size of the circle represents the value in sales of that product. So a large circle would mean that the company generates a lot of revenue from that particular product. Now let's go over each of the 4 categories within the matrix. A product in a high growth market but has low market share is called a question mark or problem child. The reason they're question marks or problem children is because they have potential, but you don't know how they'll end up. Like a problematic child could be stupid, or they're just bored and need extra attention in order to excel, so you don't know which it is. And just like the metaphor, products in this category have the potential to become a dominant player in the industry, but we just don't know yet. It could go either way. New products usually start in this category because let's say you start a new business. You'd have a low market share to begin with because you're just starting, and you'd want to create a product in a high growth market, because high growth usually means a fairly new industry. So you know that all the other companies in these industries are fairly new as well. It's a lot easier to compete with new companies than large established firms that you will find if you targeted a more mature market. Question marks typically have negative cash flows because a lot of money is used to improve the product in order to beat out its competitors. So they don't really have a lot of money to spare. In fact, when large companies create new products, it's not uncommon for them to use money generated from their other products in order to fund these new projects to give them a head start. A strategy companies can use for question marks that are falling behind might be to first segment the business to target a smaller niche instead of taking on the entire market at once. An example of a question mark would be something like the Apple Watch. That's because it's a fairly new product and we're not sure whether or not it will do well. The next category is a star. If a business unit or a product line is in a high growth market and has a high market share, then it is a star. Stars are usually question marks that have successfully beat out most of its competitors, and as a result, now controls a large portion of the market. A star's main focus is to maintain its position at the top. You'll see why later. They can do this by continuing to grow like they had when they were question marks, to continue to create barriers to entry and building more of a competitive advantage. Even though stars have accumulated a high market share, they're still in a high growth market, which means that the level of competition is still very high. So in order for a star to maintain its star status, almost all of its generated revenue has to be reinvested back into improving itself. For example, the iPhone is a good example of a star at Apple. It's super popular, a lot of people buy the iPhone, and they make a lot of revenue from the sales. But they don't actually generate a lot of profit for the company. That's because they have to dump a lot of that money back into R&D to continually improve in order to stay on top of the competition. For example, every few years, Apple has to come up with a new version of the iPhone. Otherwise, some other company with new technology is going to produce a phone that's a lot better and then take all of Apple's customers. Most companies don't make their profits from stars. Instead, they make most of their money from what stars become if they successfully stay at the top during the growth phase of a particular market. If a company succeeds in keeping their product a star, once the market slows down, it becomes a cash cow. When this happens, they won't have to spend as much money improving the product because there will be less and less competition as the market loses attractiveness. For example, Colgate and Crest are two big toothpaste companies. Toothpaste is not a high-growth market. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if sometime in the next 10 years, our technology allows us to fight cavities without having to brush our teeth at all. Knowing this, no one in hell would decide to create a toothpaste company and compete against two large companies in a dying market. As a result, Colgate and Crest doesn't have to use a lot of money to develop new versions of toothpaste. Everyone buys from them anyway, and they get to keep all of the revenue as profits. This type of product is called a cash cow, and cash cows are where businesses make most of their profits. I guess a good Apple product that would be considered a cash cow is the App Store. Quite a lot of people buy from the App Store, Apple makes money from each purchase, and there isn't much competition. They don't have to spend a lot of money improving the App Store either. And finally, when something has low market share and is in a declining market, it is called a dog. Dogs are question marks that have failed in gaining market share during the growth periods of the market. They're generally considered bad, and the recommended action to take for dogs is to either phase it out, sell it off, or shut it down. Sometimes, though, a dog for one company could be a cash cow for another company, so you can actually sell it for a reasonable price. For example, a smelly cologne that nobody buys could be rebranded by a prank company as Grandma's Perfume or something and might actually do well. One thing to keep in mind is that dogs aren't completely failed business units. Their revenues usually break even with their costs. That's why they're still around after all the other question marks that couldn't break even end up shutting down. These categories can change all of a sudden. If a famous celebrity posts a video of themselves using a new brand of toothpaste, it could literally turn a dog into a cash cow overnight. Similarly, something can happen to turn a product from any of the four categories into any other category. Because of this, large successful companies usually have a diversified portfolio of different products. So even if one of their cash cows turns into a dog overnight, they'll still have other sources of revenue to recover with. Remember that the BCG Matrix is just a tool for us to visualize the portfolio of a company. It's meant to help us make decisions, but not to actually make decisions for us. For example, the Matrix tells us that dogs are bad and that we should sell it out. But that doesn't mean that it's always the case. Sometimes a dog can indirectly contribute to the sales of another product in the company. Like if there was a brand of cereal that wasn't too popular, but it's popular enough to be on the shelves of your local grocery store. Maybe they also have a frozen pizza product as well. And a lot of people buy their pizzas because they've seen that brand before in the cereal aisle. So the cereal, which is the dog, is actually great marketing for their pizzas. That was everything you need to know about the BCG Matrix. The thing I really like about the Matrix is that it's a tool that can be used with everything else we learn in business strategy. I hope you learned something. If you found this interesting, you can also check out my video on the Eisenhower Matrix and my video on the product lifecycle.